All right, well, hello, I'm Andrea Gehrz, and thanks for having me in New Orleans. Feel free to turn your camera on at any point if you want. I'm kind of a Socratic-based teacher. I do like discussion, and as opposed to a lecture where people kind of tune out, which is fine. You can tune out, but I do use examples during this lecture for people who are tuned in. So, yeah, so I guess my goal tonight, we have 2 hours, is to teach you guys everything I can about astrological remediation. Now, as you can see, here's this book. It's a guide for the modern practitioner. And this book, we sell a ton of these. And the only reason I'm telling you that is I'm just saying that a lot of astrologers have this textbook. It's not like a book that's really rare and esoteric. Like you might actually see this, with planets in transit, and then you see remediation with it. So the point is like this is a textbook that people use constantly to deal with remediation. It's not the kind of book that you get and read overnight. We have a group who reads it on Tuesdays, and it takes us about a year to get through the book. But we read the whole thing start to finish. People pop in and out, obviously, but it is kind of like a textbook that you could read with a teacher. So that's kind of the what we're dealing with tonight is kind of trying to teach as much as we can from that textbook as much as I can in a 2 hour session, basically. So I'm just gonna start, and I have a PowerPoint, but it's a lot of my PowerPoints aren't super PowerPointy. They're more holding space for kind of discussion and things. Hold on, I want to make this so I can see everyone. Okay. Okay, so tonight we're discussing a little bit of theory and then methodology. So a lot of it's going to be theory actually, and then at the end we're going to get to a few methods. Um, yeah, really learning the methodology of remediation could take you a year or 2 years. It's the kind of study that you take up and then you keep studying for several years. I mean, how many of you, when you started studying psychological astrology, just studied it for a day? It's like that's the kind of thing you study for a few years, or even evolutionary astrology. You might study that for a few years. So look at, remediation is the kind of thing that you are going to pick up theoretically tonight, but then, learning the methods to remedy things, how to deal with cases, that's a lifelong study, honestly. It's like, does a doctor learn how to be a doctor and then they just learned it one day? I think doctors learn case by case, and that's how we are as astrologers too. We learn case by case. So, soak up as much theory as you can tonight, knowing that you will then start working one case at a time to really look at remedies in each chart. So a little introduction to who I am and how I got here. I have been an astrologer for 25 years. And by that, I mean reading charts and everything. A few years ago, I purged about 4 feet of charts, and that was only some of my charts. I've probably done 6,000 reading. I mean, I don't know, that's just a willy-nilly number. But, I'm an astrologer who's seen thousands of charts, and, remediation welled up in me. And there was a point where I had to write the book because I felt heavy with the knowledge of having done these readings and listened to people and heard their cases and tried to remedy them and all this stuff. And so, when you think of me, think of I'm a teacher at this point in my career, but I am a person who has done chart readings. So if you're just here to learn to read your own chart, that's great. But if you're here to be a reader, that's great too. The Moira Press is the school that I run. We learn all things remediation, but also we deal with some ancient texts. And yeah, that's who I am. Um, Now I got to start with this question is can I get a raise of hands? How many people here identify as a Hellenistic astrologer, or how many people have studied Hellenistic astrology? Anyone? Okay. Well, people always ask me, how many people know what Hellenistic astrology is? How's that? Okay. All right. So Hellenistic astrology is the ancient Greek lineage of astrology, and it's all the rage in the current time
Sure
period, I would
is.
say. What did you say?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I unmuted myself. I said it sure is.
It sure is. Okay, yeah. So people always ask me, "Are you a Hellenist?" And the thing is, I'm actually Hellenist adjacent. But actually, I'm one of the main players in Hellenistic astrology. Actually, I'm one of the people who translated the Vedias Valens anthology from Greek into English. I can actually read ancient Greek. I went to Kepler College and I learned about all these translations that they were trying to translate over. And I've been a sign language interpreter for 10 years. So I went off and I studied ancient Greek and Latin to go and then translate these texts because a lot of the translators were kind of struggling with the translation process. So, how does this apply to the remediation talk? Well, I don't know if you guys know this, but Hellenistic astrology is quite scary. A lot of people like the horror effect of Hellenistic astrology, where they look, Vedius Valens, who wrote a lot of the textbooks of the ancient times, was a Scorpio moon. He was very scary. He would say things like Mars brings bloodshed, shouting and shrieking, and all this stuff. Or he'll say like this baby died at the age of 1 month, or he's just constantly talking about how charts are hard or bad. And so as a translator, I couldn't tweak the text I was translating, but what I could do is write a response text, which was astrological remediation. Basically, I said, okay, if we're going to be this real about charts, then we need to say that there are remedies for anything you can see in a chart. So, I am not, I am a neo-traditional modern astrologer, basically. I can look at a chart Hellenistically. I know what a perfection is. I know of zodiacal releasing. I don't really, it's not really my jam, but anyway, I know all that, but I choose to focus on remedy theory. Okay. So now, that being said, there is something called teleology, and I really want you guys to look into this theory, teleology. There's an article on astro.com called An Introduction to Teleology for the Modern Astrologer. And what teleology is the ancient theory upon which Hellenistic astrology was built. When I was reading the ancient texts, I couldn't quite understand them. It took me 15 years to do Valens, and they kept using this word telos, and it was like telos this, telos that, and I read the Tetrabiblos, and they talk about telos, and it's like, what is this telos thing? Well, then I went to a history of a science convention of all places, and there were several lectures on teleology. And I went to these lectures, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's teleology. We're missing teleology. And so then I went back and I was able to translate the text after that. And what teleology is a study of things becoming themselves. So astrologers are teleologists. We are saying, who is this person and what are they becoming and how can I help them become themselves? I mean, do you guys agree that that's what we do as astrologers? That we are studying individuality of human people, and that's why no two charts are the same, no two lives are the same, and that is actually not a woo-woo thing. It is grounded in an ancient theory called teleology. So what the job was of ancient astrologers was to look at what is this thing becoming, this person, and how can we help them grow maximally. So Vedius Valens was saying, this chart is very martial. There might be shouting and shrieking and bloodshed. But what he meant was, this is the chart of a warrior. We have an ultimate fighter here. We need to grow this ultimate fighter well. So you see how he was actually kind of trying to figure out, what do I need to do with this chart? But first I have to figure out what is growing here. Right? In the modern day, the modern psychological astrologers might say, let's say we had a baby who had a moon in Aries conjunct Mars in Aries in the first house. And they were in school and they kept hitting people. Sometimes we get like the problem child who keeps hitting their classmates. Well, the psychological astrologer might, come up with some psychological, like, well, the spirit is this and that, and we need to, I don't know what psychological astrologers say. Like, I mean, I'm like a brutalist doctor in some ways. I'm like, jump on that kid and suck some of his blood. He's got too much iron. Like, no, I mean, like part of me wants to temper the kid's behavior, but really what we would do is take them out of the school. We would say, we are growing the plant of an ultimate fighter here. Ultimate fighters do not grow in schools. They grow in martial arts arenas, right? We'd pluck them out of the school and put them in the martial arts class. You see what I mean? So I want you to learn to be real like the Hellenists were real, but we're not supposed to be scared. We're supposed to help the person grow. So I think that's a little tweak for all the people who have been put off by ancient Greek astrology and how real it is. It's like it's actually beautifully real. Because if you can't tell what's growing here, you can't really help it grow. If you're like, if this is a rose plant, is it a cantaloupe? I can't really tell. We don't want that. You know what I mean? Another example of this would be, let's say we had a chart of a kid that was kind of chubby, okay, which is something else we pathologize in our culture, right? So let's say we saw a Moon, Venus, Jupiter conjunction in Taurus in the first house. Can you imagine that chart? Moon, Venus, Jupiter, and Taurus. Okay, these are the benefic planets, right? These are going to bring a lot of a good thing, which is eating sugar. Like, you know what I mean? So the kids eating sugar and pastries, and they're eating a lot because Taurus lives in the ear, nose, and throat, and they have a really sensitive palate. And, we might say, like, instead of pathologizing them and saying, this kid is too chubby, would say, you look perfectly like a chef. You look like one of those chefs who eats their cookies and tries out what they made. And, it's like, if you're going to be really into food, let's have you be a chef. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, that's the first remedy we look at is just who are you and how can you be the best that you can be, right? So here's a little discussion point. Do you guys think that anyone can be an Olympic athlete if they really want to? All right, Liz says no. Denise says no. I mean, why is that? What about manifestation theory? What if we just vision it and dream it?
It only gets you so far.
All right, okay, interesting. So visions, okay, we can manifest things, but maybe only if they're what we are built for or something like that, right? You have to be kind of built like an Olympic athlete to really make it in that field, right? Or something like that. So a lot of what we look at is, physical body types and how are people built, what are you built to do and things like that. Like here's a Cancer, a picture. This is from Astrological Body Types, one of my favorite books. Here's a picture of a Cancer. Like not every Cancer looks like this. Here's a thin Cancer, but here's a kind of a round Cancer, right? Can this person become an Olympic athlete? Well, I guess, but I don't think they would want to. They want to cook, they want to go and cook for their kids or something. You know what I'm saying? It's just like how we're built has something to do with what we're here to do and what we're growing here. And so that's part of the remediation. The first thing is kind of acceptance of what is. Okay. All right, let's see if I can get a raise of hands. Can you already read a natal chart personally? Okay. All right. Okay. Can you read transits? Okay. All right, you're actually in the right place for this class because, and this is fine for beginners too. But people think once they can read a chart and they can read transits, they've kind of arrived as an astrologer, and that's kind of true. But the bigger question is, what do we do with that information? You know, a lot of times you look at a chart and you're just overwhelmed. Like there's so many squares, there's so many trines. It's just like all these transits, and now I have like the progressions, and then I have this wheel with perfections, and I'm just overwhelmed with data, right? And we're going to fix that today, to a large extent. But I think the question is what do we do with the information that we can see? In fact, computer programmers call this noise. When they have a lot of data they're dealing with, they only pluck out the data that applies to the specific use case they're working on. So they might have all these numbers and they say, I need this one line, and they pluck out that one line and then they use it in what they're building. Everything else they call noise, right? So I think as astrologers, we want to be like, how can I cut through all this noise to make a useful reading, to make an useful use of this chart? And I think that's one of the things that I can teach you as just an old astrologer and a remedy artist. Okay. All right, now I am going to ask you guys to talk for a second, which is if you want this lecture to be ultra meaningful, I would like to know if there's anything in your personal chart that you want to remedy or your life. Does anyone have an aspect they want remedied? Denise.
I have a sun in Libra that's kind of widely opposed to Saturn in Aries, and that's probably one of my harder ones. And then the moon is in square to those.
Oh, interesting. What is the degree of your sun in Libra?
It's like 5 degrees and 40 some minutes. The
Okay, what
moon
degrees
is
of Saturn?
almost 2 degrees of Capricorn, and then my Saturn's like 23 degrees of Aries.
Interesting. So the first thing I'm noticing is the pattern here is like when a transit, I'm always running transits on the chart, because a chart is not a static thing. It's a cyclical thing that comes out on transits, okay? So for example, if we're providing a remedy, people think you put on a stone and you just wear the stone all the time. Well, I'm more of a fan of wear the stone when there's a transit to the part of your chart that needs a remedy, right? We only need to remedy things cyclically. So the first thing I'm looking at is how you cycle. So the moon will hit your sun square moon. If the moon was the hand of the clock we were looking at, it would hit your sun square moon. And it would take about 6 hours to unfold that because the moon's at 2 and then the sun's at 5 Libra. So it takes about 6 hours for the moon to unfold that. And then for about, let's see, 18 degrees apart. So then for the next 36 hours, the moon would oppose your Saturn. So it's like when I'm looking at the aspect, I'm looking at like expanding it in time. It's like, how long does it really take? So I would say that those are kind of like two aspects of personality. You get your sun square moon, and then the next day you get your Saturn. But that doesn't mean they're not opposed. They're opposed by sign, and it's like a Libra wants to connect with people, and then the Saturn and Aries might, say like, I don't know if I did that well enough, or like maybe I was too much, or Saturn and Aries is always kind of being like, oh, don't be too much, or something like that. But I think, so just rhythmically, I want you to first notice like I'm Sun square moon, and then the next day I'm Saturn and Aries. Sun square moon, and then I'm Saturn and Aries. Okay. Anyone else? Liz.
I have a T square with Saturn square to both Uranus and Jupiter. And Jupiter is conjunct Chiron, so that means Chiron is square to Saturn as well, and opposite Uranus.
Interesting. So what degree is your Saturn?
It's like 24 Cancer.
Oh, you're one of those. Okay. And then your Uranus is at what degree Libra?
28, I think.
28 Libra. And what degree is your Jupiter?
I believe it's 25 Aries, the one that's the double rainbow Sabian symbol.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So you go from like Saturn at 24 degrees, then you go in a square to Jupiter at 25 Aries, and then you go into a Uranus at 28 Libra. So, okay, so I'm noticing a pattern. It's like Saturn and Cancer might be like, oh, I don't know if I'm doing enough for my family, or, like, I don't know if I'm a good mom, or whatever it is. And then Jupiter and Aries would be like, but I'm actually great. I'm actually a great person. And, I'm a good leader, and, these things. And then Uranus and Libra would be like, no, I need to connect with someone else and see what they think. Or, I don't know. It's a T square. The first thing I'm kind of doing when I do any remedy is just kind of understanding the aspect a little bit. You see how, I mean, I haven't let you talk back to me. We're not in a reading per se, but that's kind of just how I'm thinking about it a little bit, right? Okay. Anyone else want theirs included? Okay. All right. Now let's work on this question. If you worked as an astral mechanic, what would your job description look like? Okay, so, what does a mechanic do? We were talking about this yesterday at the reading group we were reading about this, and we were thinking about what makes us like our mechanic, because a lot of people go to the same mechanic over and over again. And, some people say, well, I like when they're available. Like, have you ever had a mechanic you can't get to? It's like you got something broken and you can't get to them because they're full of cars or whatever. Well, that's not a good mechanic. Like, if you can't get to your astrologer on time and you got a problem and you need it remedied, like, you got to be kind of available, number one, So the mechanic's available to fix problems. Now, they fix problems, though. So I want to kind of orient you to the idea that being an astrological remedialist is a little bit like being a mechanic because you're fixing problems. Okay. So a lot of people, just read charts, whatever that means. But most of the time, people are coming to a chart reading for a reason. They either have an issue in life, or existential boredom is a problem. What should I do with my life? That is a problem. It's like, you're like, I'm a mechanic, I'll fix it, I'll give you something to live for, which is looking in their transits for the next 6 months and maybe making a cool narrative for them of like, you could be doing this, you could be doing this, you could be doing this. But see how that existential boredom is a problem and you are solving it, actually. But I think we really, on my list of things to do in a reading, I have a big list, but the first thing on my list is inquiry first. So I want you to teach you this. This is the first lesson tonight. Always work inquiry first. And if someone says, read my chart, and that's the only inquiry, you can either force an inquiry beyond that, or you can make yourself a template that is a read my chart template. Because what the inquiry is just put your eyes on my chart and tell me whatever you see. Well, then you have to decide what am I going to look for? Do I start with the sun and then go to the moon and then go to the north node because I'm an evolutionary astrologer? Or what is my read my chart? So that's actually a very hard inquiry. And if you don't have a template, I have a template. I'm like, okay, I'll go teaching the chart and this and that, or I'll go aspects of personality or whatever. But more often we have a real inquiry. And so I want you guys to push an inquiry on the person, which is, they schedule the reading and then you say, well, what are your questions for the reading? Or what would you like to talk about during this reading? And then when you get the inquiry, then all that data starts to come into focus, right? If they said, I want to know when I should travel this year. Okay, well, now our job is to go in and figure out when does this chart, when would it be good for it to travel? And of course, we always have the inquiry and then we have the data we're looking at. And so it depends on what we see in the data, how we really approach it. Being an astrologer is a hard job. It's not actually easy, but let's say the inquiry is like, what does my chart say about love? Well, maybe the secret inquiry there is, can you help me find love? You know what I mean? I don't really know. It's never like, just tell me my chart's not into love and I'll be fine. That's like never the real question. It's like, can you help me with love, basically? But the point is if you're an astral mechanic, you would deal with the problem at hand. Can you imagine if you took your car to the auto mechanic and you had a flat tire and they're like, well, we're not going to fix that flat tire, but we have decided we're going to fix that door handle. That would be really weird, right? So it's like, it's our job as mechanics to help people with problems. So sometimes, and you have to decide, what is your scope of practice? Do you help with medical problems? Do you help people physically? What is your scope of practice at this point? Now, as remedy artists, you can keep building into a bag. It's like a doctor with a bag of tricks. Some people do flower essences, some people use music to help people, some people use acupuncture and massage, and they're also an astrologer. You have this bag of tricks that you might use to help or heal in each case, and that can get bigger and bigger over the years. Maybe now you don't do medical cases, which is one kind of remedy, but in 10 years, you study enough medical astrology that you realize, okay, I'm going to take on some medical questions or medical inquiries. But the point is I want you to see yourself as a mechanic, and you're always fixing the problem for the person before they leave. What astrologers have generally done, and before I wrote Remediation, I was sad because the astrologers would do things like this. They would say, oh, you have a T-square, you have a Moon, Mars, Pluto T-square, and you have a lot of trauma, and you're really probably abusive or abused, and yeah, you have a really hard chart. All right, I'll see ya. Like, ouch, like, ow, is anyone else in pain? Like, I'm in pain. Like, that was not a great astrology reading, no offense. But it's like, in India, where astrology was not subjugated by Christianity, remedies have been going for 2,000 years. They never subjugated remedies. I got a call the other day, Andy, can I use the word astrological remediation? I'm like, of course, I didn't invent the word. In India, they've been using remedies for 2,000 years. And that's actually expected in astrology, is that when we look at things, we also offer remedies. So I just want you guys to know that without remedies, astrology can be a little bit mean/detrimental to our clients sometimes. And I'm not trying to scare you, but I do want you to be happy astrologers. And I think if you're stressed out and unhappy about what to do about, hard things in the chart, that's because remedies is part of astrology, basically. Okay, any comments or questions about the astral mechanic analogy? Okay. Well, I will say it's really funny. I always imagine this kind of mechanic. So, can you imagine if your brother-in-law was a mechanic and you were like, I'll pick you up for the party later, and they got in your car and then they're riding around your car and they're like, it smells weird in this car, and Yeah, and I hear a sound over there, and like, they create a bunch of problems while they're riding around in the car, and then they're like, all right, now we're at a party. And you're like, oh my God, you just created all these problems. It's like astrologers do this all the time. It's like we just do astrology for people like willy-nilly. And we I guess I'm just saying, take your role seriously. If you talk about a problem in a natal chart, it kind of is something that then needs to be fixed. Okay. All right. Now, I'm a discussion-based teacher, so if anyone wants to talk or, hear someone other than myself talk, please say something. I have more slides than we can. It's not like I'll run out of content. I'm saying, don't be afraid to speak up. Okay. The next slide is, what is an astral schematic? Well, obviously it's an astrological chart. But I do think that astrology gets this kind of woo-woo reputation of like, we're looking at a chart and it's this fanciful thing and it's just very woo-woo. And I'm like, well, when you're old like me, you're like, no, this is a schematic diagram. Like, architects use schematics and engineers use schematics. I mean, we're up there with engineers, actually, right? Where they might be looking at the electrical diagram of a bridge or a house or something like that. We're looking at the electrical diagram of a human being and their chakras and their aura, and there's these things called dermatomes, which are these swaths of skin that we can look in. We can actually apply that schematic to like several things. So I want you to kind of, at least from a remediation standpoint, get your head on the idea that this is actually a very respectable thing to have a schematic diagram, right? It might even be a fun homework for you to Google schematic diagrams and look at them in other disciplines, because you'll realize, oh, we're looking at an astral schematic. The word astral means star. So we're looking at the schematic of the stars, but astral also means your energy body. Like your astral body is like your aura and your chakras and everything like that. So we can be reading books like this book I love, Esoteric Anatomy. It's like the anatomy of the aura. And there's all these pictures like of bodies and things like that. And the point is we're looking at these schematic diagrams. Here's like the chakra system of a body, but there are people who have studied the anatomy of the aura, and we are looking at the schematic diagram of the aura. So we're closer to an architect than we are to a tarot reader. I mean, there's nothing wrong with things being woo-woo, but I think the level at which astrologers can work is very, very high level. And so it's not that a tarot reader can't work in a high level fashion, but it's more like tarot might be the philosophical side of these things, and astrology is more like a technical philosophy. We use philosophy all the time, but there's technicals that we're looking at. And so it's really, is it a science? Is it a philosophy? What is it? I mean, I don't know, but it's its own thing, but it is kind of like a technical philosophy. So for one of your homeworks, look up schematics. Okay. All right. So think to yourself now, this could be a journal prompt. What non-astrological remedies do you naturally use? For emotional issues or physical issues. And the reason I bring this up is I want to get you acquainted with the idea that you already can be a remedy person without really knowing astrological remediation to the hills, right? It's like you can help your friend, right? So it's like if you had a crying friend, Denise, if your friend was crying, what would you do?
Encourage them to express what they're feeling and listen.
Nice. Yeah, listening, active listening to our clients, that actually is a huge part of our job. Okay, listening. Liz, what would you do?
If someone was, I'm sorry, if someone was upset, I'm actually I'm a therapist for my job, so yeah, basically be like very validating of whatever they seem to be feeling, and like be curious, if they try to like gauge what's comfortable for them, and not do like say or do anything that would push their boundaries and make them uncomfortable, kind of like allow for them to communicate more if they want to.
Beautiful. Wow, a therapist is an amazing remediation artist. Okay, so let's actually talk about this because both of these modalities that you guys brought up look a lot like therapy or counseling, which is listening, active listening, all these things. So are astrologers counselors? Are we therapists? I say it like that because we always get accused of being counselors without the education. No, we are not counselors. We are actually consultants. Okay. And a consultant is different because they use data, right? Consultants, go into a system usually, and they use data or a theory or a structure of thinking in order to help that system get better. A corporate consultant might go into a business and say like, okay, from this theory and this theory, what we need here is this and that. Okay. So it's like, I want the data portion of it makes it a little bit more like a consultant than the counselor. So Liz, if you could actually be both. Okay. What that would look like is, let's say you had someone come into you through astrology and you notice they had Saturn going over their moon for 8 months, right? Maybe we notice they're depressed or they are having a hard time emotionally. Well, you could use therapy to walk them through that transit, right? We could say, I can see you might be upset for 8 months, or at least that's how long the planetary influence will be applying. So, do you want to schedule therapy for 8 months? We could walk through the transit together, right? See how that is, counseling is a way to help someone through a hard transit, especially since a transit like that goes on and on and on. An astrologer, we can help you from the data perspective and say, we can see how long you might be bummed, but we don't sit there with you and counsel you through every moment. See how it's a little different?
Mhm.
So I think, Liz, you can also go in through the counseling side of things. Let's say you had a counseling client and it was ethical for you to look at their chart. Maybe they're really into astrology or they're not coming in through insurance or something like that. Then you could go into the data for a little bit and say, oh, I can see why you're sad. It's that Saturn on your moon. Okay. So yeah, it's good that you're in counseling and blah, 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 blah. But you see how you looked at the chart to see. I mean, one remedy we use is, how long is this going to last? That is actually one remedy that astrologers use all the time, is predicting the end of malaise, right? So Liz, I hope that this really helps you to understand how these are different and how you actually are a remedy artist by being a counselor. And the remedy set you're providing is talk therapy, basically, right? Now, if someone has an anger issue, let's say we look in the chart and we see a Moon Mars Pluto conjunction in Scorpio. Okay, so that's some data for you, right? And you're like, okay, genetically, you're angry. Wait, did I say genetically? You know what they called the chart? Genesis. Isn't that crazy? And the Bible's also called Genesis. But anyway, it is your Genesis. And what is in there, what we are saying is you are genetically predisposed towards anger. It's actually, that's why we actually have to help fix people, is because we're actually telling them that for the rest of their life, they're cyclically going to get more angry than the next guy, right? So with a Moon Mars Pluto, we want to say, okay, I can see you have anger issues. Now, Liz could go ahead and help them with their anger issues with counseling, which is actually a totally valid way to deal with anger. I'm not so nice. I would be like, we'll be jumping on you and taking some of the iron out of you. You have too much iron. We're gonna bloodlet you. But I'm a Scorpio, right? Like I'm a Scorpio ancient occultist. It's like I have a different pathway. Galen, the ancient physician, would say that the mind's inclination follows the body's temperature. So the anger problem is coming in through the body being way too hot, way too full of red. The aura is too red. But you see how they're both remedies, actually? They're just a different pathway. And I'm using this as an example. I know it's kind of outlandish, but not really at all. I mean, we actually use physical somatic therapies all the time to cure emotional problems. Okay. Another example of this is Saturn problems. A lot of times, okay, here's an example. Saturn in Leo. Okay, like what are the problems with this? You're like, bad self-esteem, thinks they're a total zero, too overly humble, because a Leo person's like, I'm awesome, my solar plexus is spinning beautifully, and the Saturn in Leo's solar plexus is like stuck in like it's spinning like this, it's just like not spinning basically. And so their heart's all plugged up and they have a heart issue from a auric perspective. So, if, in my younger years, I would listen to people with their Saturn problems over and over, have the same Saturn problem. And I got sick of it. And I was like, there's got to be a way to get rid of this Saturn problem. And that's where I learned to go in physically. You can actually physically restructure their fascia so that their Saturn gets released. When we find in the fascia, and I learned this from working with a kinesiologist for 5 years, what we could tell is wherever the Saturn spot was, in the fascia, there's this really tight connective tissue, and we call it the rings of Saturn, because this tight connective tissue where your Saturn is, it would send a ring of connective tissue in that part of the body. So the Saturn and Leo people have this ring of tension right around their heart chakra. And so they're always like, oh my God, I'm the worst. But their heart chakra is not spinning, right? So we'd have fascial reconstruction. We have someone roll for them for like 12 weeks. And then all of a sudden, if we put a pendulum over their heart chakra, we could see it spinning. And then we would say, oh, we relieve them of some of their emotional issue. See what I mean? So it's like we can go in physically and manipulate things to help them emotionally, but then Liz could go in there emotionally to help them also, with therapy. Okay, does that make sense to people that there's a myriad of ways to remedy any problem you see in a chart?
Yeah, and I just want to say, you probably aren't seeing the chat, but Vera said hugs. So another physical remedy, but short term.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah, and it's short term, but I think somebody can, transits peak, you'll have maybe Saturn's on your moon for 8 months, but maybe the moon triggers it for one day. And so it's a really hard day. And I think hugs all day on that day could actually get someone through that little tweak. And that's great. Yeah. So I think for your journals, for some of your homework, I would love you guys to write a list of 20 things you might do to help someone who's crying. And write a list of 20 things you do to might help somebody who's violent. Let's see, what other things are there? You could write 20 things to help someone who's too shy or who's too narcissistic, right? Like, isn't it weird how astrologers deal with everything under the sun, right? If we saw Sun, Pluto, Jupiter conjunction in Leo, what might the problem be there?
Too much ego.
Yeah, their solar plexus is like, and they're like standing there like, whoa, and you're like, okay, all right. And then you're like, calm down, don't be so arrogant. And then their solar plexus just still spins like that. And you're like, okay, we need some other remedies. Talk therapy's not going to work for this. No, I don't know.
Hey, realistically, that person's not going to come in. They believe they don't have any problems.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, they're probably sent in by their producer because they work in Hollywood or something like that. And yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's what's actually fun about this job is we get everything. We get people sent to us. We get the weirdest cases, someone who's tried 19 different doctors and they're still acting out. And they're like, all right, send them over here. I'll put a stone on them. Okay. All right, I'm just going to look to the book for some just basic definitions of what is remediation. So astrological remediation is the use of the schematic language of celestial energies to heal and soothe the spirit. So sometimes we're just soothing a person by use of the chart. Like we said, that could be, telling them that when their depression's going to end, telling them they're perfect, explaining how they're okay just like they are. I mean, we don't know. You're probably wondering, well, there's a million ways to do that. And that's right. Each case is different. We take it one case at a time. Astrological remediation is the act of healing the energy body through the use of the astral schematic. Okay, so I don't know if any of you guys have read the book Hands of Light. Anyone? That book's amazing. It was written by a doctor who then had I think a head injury, and all of a sudden she could see auras. And what she saw was that illness, physical illness, started in the aura. Like, let's say somebody had a dark part in their aura. well, then that would step down to the physical and it would get in their body, like their shoulder or something like that. Well, in the chart, we do a lot of this where we look into the physical nature of things and we like, oh, I can see that they're tense on this vertebrae, like T1, T2, and T3 are just tight from Saturn. And I bet out in the aura here, we're going to see blackness or darkness. Okay, I'm going to have fascial reconstruction happen on these vertebrae to heal the aura out here. So like we actually do actually heal energetic problems. If we saw the solar plexus was in the Sun, Jupiter, Pluto, and Leo, we saw the solar plexus was, there was orange everywhere, and we had a Carillion photograph taken of their aura, and it was just orange all over the place. We'd be like, there's an excess of orange in the aura. We're going to add greens. We are going to, have you wear a big, green stone and green shirts and sit in a green room. And like, I don't know what exactly we would do for that, but I think we're trying to actually heal or help the aura sometimes. There's actually something in the chakra system that's weird. Okay. Astrological remediation is the use of the language of floating vibrations to alter hard vibrations into more harmonious ones. Okay. This one is, have you ever stood next to somebody who's on a bad transit and they have bad vibes? Okay. We deal with bad vibes sometimes. Sometimes I prescribe books to my clients like, heal your aura, find love by generating a positive energy field, because they're like emitting a really bad vibe. So, astrologers can deal with vibe. We can see the transit they're in that's making them have a bad vibe or a weird vibe, and we can cut those vibes. Incense, tones, smells, flower essences, mantras, prayers. That would be another fun thing, is to write a list of things that clear bad vibes. Music, because astrology is vibration. It is frequencies, So some charts, because we wonder, how can the chart make things happen? Well, it creates a weird vibe in a person, which then creates hard things happening, like the person with the Sun, Jupiter, Pluto, even if they're not saying anything narcissistic, they might be vibing egoic. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, even when they stand next to you, you can tell they just think they're awesome. So a lot of times when we're trying to talk a person out of their chart, it doesn't really work. We're like, can you stop just standing there being egoic? But maybe we burn some I don't know, incense for world peace, or we get a tuning fork that cuts that vibration, or like something to cut the vibes is kind of what we do a lot of the time. Okay, I think that's good for definitions. I think you guys get what it is. It's not that complicated, but does anyone have any comments or questions? Okay. Now, what are the goals of remediation? I'd say that the first one is to strengthen the character. And this was the beginning of the lecture, was a little bit about, getting the person growing in the right context so that they can be a good person. With the Sun, Jupiter, Pluto, and Leo, it's like, where might they grow really well? On Broadway. It's like, get on the stage and stand there with your huge solar plexus and entertain this whole crowd. Now, that's a great use of that chart, right? And it makes them feel better about themselves. They're not a narcissist, they're an entertainer, they're a showman, they're a show person, right? So we want to actually strengthen the character by making them feel good about whoever they are. If we see a violent chart, we might say, you're fierce, you're a warrior spirit. What do you want to fight for? I recently had a really kind of angry chart, and she was, fighting with her partner. They both had Mars at the 13th degree, and they kept fighting. And her chart was just in a Mars T-square, or had a Mars T-square. And I asked her, I was like, well, what are you fighting for? It just seems like you're constantly fighting, spiritually. And it turned out her job was fighting for women and children, like she was an advocate for women and children or something like that. And so, I strengthened her character by saying, you are here to fight. If you didn't have this fighter spirit, you wouldn't get anywhere at your job. You wouldn't have the fight in you to go out and protect thousands of children. So I think speaking to the most positive characteristics of charts is one of the ways that we can do this. Um, like with Denise and her sun square moon leading into her Saturn, I might say, well, you have a connective nature, which is that Libra sun, and a kind of businessy, respect-bearing nature with that Capricorn moon. So you could be in the business of human connection, which you run a meetup group, so that's actually perfect. But you could be building business through human connection. You could be, connecting with people and then helping them build their life in a better way. Or, what your chart does well is marry human connection with kind of rules, contracts, and business stuff. Okay. And you are supposed to edit and check yourself one day later. When the moon hits your Saturn the next day, you're going to maybe think, I did this wrong, or I made a mistake, or where, I shouldn't have done this, or I shouldn't have done that. And what we want you to do is say, tomorrow my internal editor will come out and I'll beat myself up a little bit and I'll become a better business builder after that, right? But we kind of want to speak to the strength of your character, saying editing the self is a strength if we don't, just say this is a bad aspect of personality. We say this is a very strong cycle you go through, is to help people build, and then you edit, where was I too much? Where did I have too much of myself involved? That Saturn and Aries stuff is like, was I too controlling? I don't have it in my chart. I don't know what it's like to live with that, but you do. Like, I'm sure you know some of the struggles of Saturn and Aries. But you get the point, is we want to find a good use of that equation, of that chart, to say, look, you are a great person who goes through these cycles. It's like getting an artist attuned to their cycle. Denise, do you have any comments about that?
No, that makes a lot of sense. And interesting. I have thought about it as cycles, but not so much just the moon, right? But that would be responsible for a lot of, this is happening 4 times a month, right? It's like
Once a week. Yeah, you'll do that.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and if we looked at Liz, her T-square, we could say, okay, the Saturn and Cancer kind of struggles with home, family, am I giving enough care? I know you're a therapist, so it's like, am I caregiving enough? Am I being kind enough? Or, and then, but it also takes on a leadership role with the Jupiter and Aries. So, you could be a leadership in caregiving. You could have a leadership role, like maybe you run support groups, or you take on a leader role in caregiving, and that's how you boost that Saturn. And then that Uranus and Libra can find excitement through the one-on-one connections you make in those groups, or whatever. But you see how I'm not saying, oh, this T-square, man, this thing's rough, like you're just gonna have the roughest time to need, or Liz, I mean, you're screwed with that T-square. No, sorry, I shouldn't say that, but like that's how astrologers sound sometimes, and I'm just like, oh, really? Are you strengthening the character with your analysis? Like, I just think it's not. We don't want to be posi-core. We're not trying to be toxically positive. What's cool about remediation is we can actually acknowledge the truth of the aspect as being tough on the person usually, and then we acknowledge the timing. Like, Denise said, my T-square gets triggered once a week. I can handle once a week. You know what I mean? Liz, you're gonna freak out once a week. All right, you can handle that. And though it's kind of a mania, like T-squares bring a mania where we're like, oh, I don't know, and it's like, what are we gonna do with that energy? What are we gonna, what is the strength of this character aspect, right? Same with the violent kids. We were like, well, how can you be a good moral character? Oh, you can be a ultimate fighter. You can entertain the masses by being a warrior. Okay, now we're going to give you a sensei. We're going to give you somebody to train you and discipline you, basically. But you see how we're not saying you're an awful person. You're violent. We kind of are trying to strengthen the character. So that's the first goal. 2 is similar. Open the heart to its highest wisdom. One of the things we'll find in teleology, and you guys can find on YouTube, there's a lecture. I recently did a teleology lecture for Sedona. You can find it on my YouTube channel, actually, just my name, Andrea Gehrz. But you might want to watch the teleology lecture because the whole thing is about opening the heart to its life's purpose. Teleology looks at things for their life purpose. What is the end goal of this life end chart? So what we would say from a teleological perspective is, Liz, why were you built with this T square? Why? What is the purpose of this T square? We don't just say like, oh, this is hard. We say this thing has a purpose. You're going to build one-on-one connections while being a leader in healing. That's what it's going to do. Or, but do I just know what a person's life purpose is? It's a co-creation as the astrologer. We say, okay, there's this aspect. Can you tell me the last time when Jupiter hit this? What were you doing when, Mars hit this or Jupiter? And then like, oh, I initiated a healing retreat for, young kids. And you're like, okay, so you're a leader in healing and we saw it at this time. Okay, so that's one of the things you're here for. And like, we want to look at each aspect of personality and say like, what is the larger purpose for this thing? The ancients would say, there's a word for this, they call it melatao, which means to train yourself for what you were made to do. And they would say that if we choose to train ourselves for what we're here to do, then we will be busy and zealous. So if we have that fighter chart and they train for fighting, they'll all of a sudden be a very busy fighter. If we have the narcissist chart and they train for theater, they're all of a sudden a very busy actor. See what I'm saying? So if you have an aspect of personality that's tough or it's hard, ask yourself, what is that here for? What is the purpose or reason for me having this tough aspect of personality? I really don't believe that anything under God's earth is inherently good or bad. It's just how do we use it and what do we do with it? You could take an Olympic athlete and say like, well, they're not very artistic, so they're obviously not doing anything with their life. Well, they're not built for that. They're built to run and jump over hurdles. And in the ancient times, they would probably be running and like killing a bison and feeding a whole community. But, you could also say like nothing is a detriment unless it's expected to be something else. If we don't expect our hard aspects to be anything else, we can start enjoying what they are and what they're here for. One of the ways to really test your aspects and say what is the highest wisdom of this is start watching transits to it. Like Liz, when Jupiter goes through Cancer, you're going to have Jupiter go on that T square, and that will be a cool time to watch that thing come out. And what are your visions? What are you inclined to do? What's your soul trying to do at that time? And you'll really see what it's there for. You'll see good visions for it. You don't have to wait until Jupiter gets there. You can watch the interplanet transits to it or whatever. But I think watching transits to a part of our chart and then seeing what we vision, the ancients would constantly talk about the visions. They would say that the visions teach us what we're growing into.
Hard.
Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Awesome.
All right, Vera just told me I was awesome. I'm just kidding. She's talking to someone else. Okay. Number 3, this is a big one, optimizing the physical constitution. A lot of what we do is look at a chart and say, how can this person be physically fixed or optimized so that the chakras are spinning or working better? One of the things I do with almost all my clients is teach them about their Saturn position, because especially when they're old, they've had Saturn tension building up. And, I'm like, can you get that fixed? Okay, recently, now I'm not breaking confidentiality. I'm not telling you who this was or you have no idea. But I recently had a chart and I saw a Mars-Saturn conjunction in Gemini. And, it's like, if I was being toxically positive, I wouldn't have mentioned the Mars-Saturn as having any struggles or anything like that. But what I kept seeing is like tension in the jaw, because Gemini lives in the jaw, it goes down the arms and the hands. And Mars brings inflammation and Saturn brings constriction. And I had one other case of a Mars Saturn in Gemini, and their jaw locked up. They actually got TMJ to the point where they couldn't open their mouth. And this causes a lot of really hard personality characteristics. Mars in Gemini is aggressive about communication, and Saturn in Gemini is editing. Like, so they're aggressively editing everything they say and editing everything everyone says, and they're kind of cranky. And so, I just did the brave thing and I asked her about it. I said, all I can see with this Mars Saturn is that you're just constantly tense right here. And it turns out that she has chronic migraines right here and constant neck tension that she cannot release. And she thought she was going to live with this forever. Um, I went into, a whole thing of teaching her how she could release that from her chart. And can I teach you guys that tonight? No, I've worked with kinesiologists. Like I've been a remediation artist for 20 years. But the point is there is a way to fix physical problems in the chart. Like basically I prescribed cupping, which would be pulling out the inflammation. In the ancients would constantly talk about bloodletting and purgation of fluids as part of remedy. And you guys can read Hippocrates on the Nature of Man is a really good book where he talks about the purgation of fluids constantly. But basically, cuppers do this. They put the cups on, they make tiny incisions, they put the cup back on, they pull a bunch of red out of a certain area of the chart. So I was like, we need to get red pulled out of that area, and then we need that fascia reconstructed back there so that you no longer have to deal with this chronic red entrapment, basically. The point is, a psychological astrologer would look at that and say, well, you psychologically are creating a situation where you're really crabby and really frustrated, and you just psychologically need to get that taken care of, And it's just not enough to fix the problem. Like we can talk people out of parts of their chart, but that's not a remedy necessary. It is a remedy. I'm not trying to downplay it, but I'm just saying that it's not fixing the machine that is causing this, and it would come in cyclically. Like I asked her what happened on your Saturn return. Well, she was in the hospital with a migraine at her Saturn return. That part of her was just all bent up, and it comes back cyclically, right? So the point is optimizing the physical constitution is one of my favorite things about being a remedy artist. This is the total auto mechanics of it is, and disclaimer time, I'm not a doctor. I'm just an astrologer, okay? And I just deal with problems that people cannot figure out through the doctor. I mean, I just get so sick of being downplayed. Like, you're just an astrologer. I'm like, well, I just know something that you can't see, which is actually going to help in this case. But so I just want you to know that the physical aspects of remedy can be really effective, and that's only one goal. Another, God, I sound kind of arrogant. I didn't mean to come off as arrogant. Sometimes I just get mad at I get sick of being yelled at, like, and being treated like I'm just an astrologer when I'm actually fixing problems that other people cannot figure out. But I didn't mean to come off as arrogant. But another thing about optimizing the physical constitution is diet. If we look at the astrological body types, I don't know. What do you guys think that anyone can be a vegetarian and be healthy? It's a controversial question.
I
Listen,
I tend to believe that there's like more like the perfect diet for each of us based on both genetic factors and, your past experiences, I suppose. Almost like a customized diet is best. So no, not everyone can.
awesome. Well, you're a great astrologer because that's actually what astrologers are. Is we see people as custom humans. Like each human is different, right?
Mhm.
And Hippocrates would say a doctor who's not an astrologer is but a fool. Isn't that cool? He was
Mhm.
the father of modern medicine, and he was an astrologer. And what it is that each of us is literally built differently. The ancients would say that each of us needs to feed our house in its own way. So, for example, a good example of this is I drink like 8 cups of coffee a day. I have a lot of black in my soul. I have 3 planets in Scorpio. They're all conjunct my sun. And it's like I just love the black drink of coffee, right? So people would say like, oh, if you looked at studies, you could say, oh, well, studies show that you are drinking too much coffee and all this, obviously. And I'm like, but I'm happy, I'm healthy, haven't been sick in like 5 years. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like I consistently eat what I crave, which is coffee, and I'm doing great, right? Now, this is extreme. I'm kind of a radical astrologer, which is to go to the radical side and just to eat whatever you crave. But there are charts that crave really weird things. Like if someone has 5 planets in Taurus, they might crave pastries to a level. Like Taurus is actually trying to build a lot of flesh. You know, the ancients would assume that we grow on a helix of light, and we're trying to grow our chart. So our diet actually stems from our chart trying to grow on its own helix of light. Like the chart doesn't judge. The 5 planets in Taurus wants to grow big and fleshy, and it doesn't judge that. It just that's what the plant is. The ancient teleologists would constantly compare people to plants. They would say like, well, like speaking of watery people, like I have a watery chart, I have a total belly. It's like a round water belly, right? Well, they would say, well, a watermelon plant is full of water and it's very pudgy. Or it's like, you know what I mean? Like a watermelon is super round. Like, and so they would actually come, they would say, an aloe plant is very puffy. That is a water plant. See what I'm saying? Whereas like all doctors say, well, everyone should look like this and everyone should eat the food pyramid. And, so you kind of have to be a radical activist to really live out this idea that people should eat to their chart. But, it's just one idea in the bucket of ideas, right? But here in the astrological body types, here's the earthy body, here's the water body. See how it's round with a belly? Here's the lanky air body, and here's the muscly fire body, right? So fire people, I believe, need meat. For example, if you had a sun in Aries, a moon in Leo, and you are Sag rising, a triple fire chart, I think this needs meat because it needs protein. It's living in the muscular systems of the body, right? So we have a very muscly person who maybe runs marathons. They're constantly fired up and their blood is really hot and they run and run and run. Well, in order to optimize the physical constitution, we might need to say meat is a good thing for this chart. Like, what about sumo wrestlers? I don't know. They have a really crazy diet. The point is, I think feeding the person to their life path and purpose would keep them healthier spiritually than, feeding them to the food pyramid, perhaps. If you're an astronaut, you might have to eat freeze-dried food because you're going to the moon, but it's fulfilling your life path and purpose. Okay. Any comments or questions? All right.
This is somewhat interesting to me. A friend of mine she studied a lot with Deborah Silverman, is all about balancing yourself out. Whereas I feel like with the remediation you're talking about is more like really diving in. Yes?
Good question. Oh my God, I have a slide about this. I'm more of a mega manifestation than balancer.
Mm-hmm.
The reason for that is everything I've studied is that if we live out our chart to what it's built for, we are happier spiritually and we want to live, right? If we do this balancing act of like, you're triple Scorpio and you crave coffee, so you need to go to Taurus, which is the opposite, and eat more or drink more tea because that's what the opposite sign would do, and we need to balance you out. Well, it might make the Scorpio a little healthier scientifically, but their soul is dying the whole time. They're like, God, where's my coffee? Can I have my black drink? Like, I just want to be kind of riled up. I'm martial. I'm kind of intense. I like when I drink my coffee and I'm intense, right? Whereas the Taurus value is calm down and drink your tea. We're Venusian people, So I think balance is actually one big remedy, and I think it is a viable remedy. like harm reduction brings up balance. Like if the person has 5 planets in Taurus and they're getting to the point where they might die of obesity or something like that, we want to go towards the opposite way of being and maybe have them eat like an air person. Air foods are a lot of green leafy vegetables, and a lot of oxygenized foods are green and blue. So it's like a lanky air person eats a lot of green leafy vegetables to stay lanky and thin. So we could trick the Taurus person's body into eating like that, which would lose the weight, but they wouldn't be in their own chart. You know what I mean? They would be kind of bummed. I mean, don't you think people get bummed when they have to go on a diet sometimes?
Yeah, I have
Um,
some friends who've lost tons of weight, and they say that, they're like, you never eat another delicious thing again in your life. You know, with a very sober, sorrowful attitude.
isn't that interesting? I guess this is a really good question of like, when do we go towards balancing and when do we go towards
Mm.
mega manifestation? I think we have to look at all the factors of like, are they going to die? Is it killing them? Is it, are they thriving with this diet? Are they sick with this diet? So, but one of the reasons I like mega manifestation is they say you can die under the machine of another. Meaning, how have you ever worked for a boss who does things differently and you just feel like you can't go to work and you're sick and it's like what we're supposed to do is live to our chart every day, one transit at a time, and then we never get sick. We basically never fall into a state of disease because we're flying spiritually, basically. It's like, so I like mega manifestation because it moves chi a lot better and keeps people from getting sick. Whereas the opposite balancing effect kind of depresses them. I don't know. I think it depends on the case.
Thanks for, rolling it around. I just was curious.
So in this, I don't have a cover on this book. Do you guys know Judith Hill's medical astrology book?
Yeah, I don't own it, but yes.
I love it. Judith's a good friend of mine. And there's this chapter on like excess and deficiency of elements. Like she says like earth excess. And then it says antidote for earth. So like she says earth excess, mental dullness, lack of mental creativity, either boring or suffers a chronic sense of boredom. Laconic, overeats and overworks. The body is sluggish and very large or heavy and very bony. Suffers dryness, constipation. Okay, so if the person had some of these characteristics and they were super earthy and they wanted to change it,
Mm.
then I might go into and look at antidote for earth excess, air then water. So she says like purgatives, colonic therapy, fasting, vegetarianism, saunas, emotional and affectional development. So I would actually go into this book and read the antidotes, and I would read them to my clients. Say, what do you think of these? Do you or eating a bunch of spicy foods to get your sluggishness up, or if you're depressed, can we, like wearing colors that are opposite the chart. Like let's say we have a super Capricorn chart, like your Cap moon, and we suffer from boringness. It's like this Cap moon's wearing brown colors. They have brown eyes, castor brown hair, and they wear brown power suits all the time. And we're like, okay, so you're respect bearing and you are commanding respect in the law, in the courtroom or in the principal's office where you work, but you're kind of boring. It's like, can we go add some red or orange to that, from a color perspective? But we would be bringing in the kind of core value of those more fun signs like Leo's orange. It's like, can we wear some bling or something? You know what I mean? But see how we're changing the value of the Capricorn and doing that? But if they consent to the change, I think it would be good. If we just force it on them, they're like, you're obviously not okay because you're too Capricorn. It kind of depends if they want to change or not.
Mhm.
Yeah, you've asked a really advanced and awesome question because like when do you balance, when do you go with it? That's a big one. Like it's hard to decide.
But what I think I'm hearing from you is it really depends on what the client's goals are.
Yeah, what's the inquiry?
Yeah.
If we had a really violent kid with the Moon Mars conjunction in Aries, and the parent said, "Can you please help make this kid not violent?" We would say, "Okay, let's try every balancing act we can. Like, we don't want them in a red bedroom. Can you, because that's a color red. It's like they, kids say like, I saw red and then I punched someone. That's like too much Aries in the system is red in the top third. So they'll, it's like, can we have them looking at green, which is the opposite color of Libra? Can we have them taking Venusian herbs, which, Venus kind of calms down Mars issue. That's a balancing, So I think, yeah, but then also what I've seen with these Mars problems is like you have to purge the Mars by like working them out. They have to exercise, like you run a dog at the park. It's like, so you kind of have to go with the Mars to purge it, So it's, you could do both, I guess. Yeah. I like that. I like what you're saying, that it depends on the goal. And yeah, and also harm reduction is a big one, Um, if you're a Pisces and all you want to do is drugs and it's just not working for you, you have to get sober. You know what I mean? Like you have to. It's gonna kill you, basically, So, but I really don't tweak people unless I really need to, because I would rather help them become themselves than say there's something pathological about you being you, essentially.
Makes sense.
Okay. Let me see what time it is. Okay, 6:17. Okay, let's move on to this question, which is, what is an aspect cluster and why is it important to astrological remediation? So you remember when we talked about looking at a chart and you just get overwhelmed with all the lines in there? And, I really want to encourage you to break a chart down into aspect clusters. So oftentimes when I work with a chart, I'm actually working with about 5 wheels, and on each wheel is one aspect cluster. So like maybe I'll put like the Moon Mars conjunction in Aries on one wheel, and I just do this. There's no computer program that does this. You might have to draw charts by hand, but like I just put the Moon Mars conjunction in Aries on one wheel, and then maybe I'll put the whatever aspect is on this wheel. And the reason for that is often a problem is in the natal chart in an aspect cluster. It's like, if the problem is violence, we're going to see one aspect of personality that's violent. I mean, how often do you see a chart that has like 3 violent aspects? It's usually just one, So by putting, taking out the aspects and putting them on different wheels, we basically make that aspect handleable, because then we can start looking at transits to this one aspect of personality, and that's palatable to the client. Often they can understand that, but if you give them this whole chart, you're like, how am I going to teach you transits? And it's too much. And does that make sense? Where it's just, it really distills it down to, when I look at, Denise and Liz's T-squares here, it's like, that's all I'm looking at is the T-square. I'm not trying to look at the whole chart. I mean, of course, if I was doing a reading for you, I would be looking at the whole chart. But in this lecture, I'm just looking at that T-square, that one aspect cluster, because I'm only going to try to remedy one cluster at a time. So it's like this idea of like, you might get an inquiry like, I have 4 weak planets. What should I do? Okay, let's put each weak planet on one wheel. And, with this planet, how are we going to boost it up in XYZ way? And when are the transits to it? When have the transits been on it? And when will it be up? So then it gives us a more control of that aspect. So, they would call your chart your song of life. And, songs have like 4 chords in them. Think about each aspect cluster as one chord in this song. And then the person will cyclically express this whole song in 1 month. The moon goes around and they play their whole song once. But you're only going to see them being violent on, if it's a conjunction, they'll be violent, when the moon hits it here, and then 5 days later from the sextile, then 2.5 days after that, and then 2.5 days after that. Like, so you can actually, time how often are you going to be violent theoretically. And if it's a square, then okay, the moon hits it here, and then a week later it hits it here. And so, but you might even name them. You might say, we could call Denise's aspect the business connector who then edits itself, or something like that. I mean, I don't know what we would call it. With Liz's T-square, we could say a power healer who then connects with other people or something. I mean, those are weird names, but some of them are, with the Sun, Jupiter, Pluto, and Leo, we might call it like the insane showman, like the epic showman. We might not call it like the total narcissist, but we might call it the epic showman. It depends on why they came or who they are. But you see what I'm saying is that putting one on each wheel and then naming them gives you the ability as a remedy artist to kind of have more control over the aspect clusters. Now, what do you do if you have like a meandering chart? Like you have the sun then leading into a trine to Mars like many degrees later, and then it leads to us, then what would you guys do? How would you decide which aspect cluster to put which planet with? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, my impulse would be just to listen to the client and see what I'm hearing as something that's bringing them difficulty.
Nice. Yeah, you could just hone in on whatever the issue is. You remember back to the inquiry. It's like, well, I'm not even going to deal with that. I'm just going to deal with the question at hand. Okay. Yeah, I think I would say that each chart is a pattern. It's more important for you to kind of get the pattern down than to say like this Mars goes over here. It doesn't go over with this aspect. It goes over this aspect. It's like you could put it on both wheels if it kind of meanders between two aspects or something like that. But really what you're trying to grok is the pattern of the chart. Okay, so another homework for you guys is to study exploded axonometrics. It's an exploded axon, AXON. Architects use these all the time. They'll draw a building on one piece of paper. And like, how detailed can you get on one piece of paper on the building drawing? Well, not that detailed, but then they explode it out and they put one floor on each piece of paper, so they'll have a first floor axon and then a second floor explosion and then a third floor. And sometimes they'll explode, like they'll take the sink and they'll explode out and then draw the sink parts, or the toilet, they'll explode it out and draw the toilet pieces. And then they point to everything and they say, go look here for this piece or whatever. But see how astrologers could and should be doing this? We should be exploding charts and be like, all right, well, we're going to pull out your Mars-Jupiter conjunction and we're just going to put that right here and we're going to draw a bunch of arrows to it and say this means this and this means that, and then we delineate around there. So when you study exploded axons, I think you'll relax and you'll be like, oh, the architects do it. Why are we not doing this? Because you'll be able to work with clients a lot more when you have these kind of good visuals to deal with, basically. Are you looking at one, Denise? You're on mute.
Yes.
Aren't they cool?
You can do that with Luna astrology, and I've never really played around with it, but where you can just feature like certain aspects.
Is that a program?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I'll have to tell people about that program.
Yeah.
Okay. So how can we watch an aspect cluster in real time to understand its effects? So this is where once we have a problem and then we've decided we think we know what aspect cluster is causing that problem, we really want to isolate what is causing a problem, So we want to watch it in real time. Maybe with Liz's client who had the Saturn going over the moon for a year, for 8 months, maybe we say, I think that's what's causing the depression. And then you think, I'm going to watch, the next 3 moon transits to it and see how they're doing, or something like that. Or if we have that violent aspect in the chart with the moon, Mars, Pluto conjunction, well, we can look forward into the future and see the next time Mars hits it by transit. And then 6 months later, Mars will hit it again by transit. And so we can write down these pockets of time we can say, okay, during, this week and this week, we're going to have a flare up theoretically. And can we watch the person and see how they're feeling, what they're doing? So what we really want to do is study an aspect in real time. People often think you meet with a client and you just remedy it right there. Well, we're theoreticians. I mean, we kind of do remedy things theoretically right there. If we work with advanced astrologers, which you guys will find yourself doing a lot, you can tell them, all right, what you need to do is watch when Mars hits it here, watch when Mars hits it there, and then you'll be noticing, for violent tendencies, and then you go into remedies if the violent tendencies come out. But if it's a client who doesn't know what a transit is, or they don't really know astrology, it might take us a few months of working with them to get them seeing their thing in real time and then figuring out how to remedy it. A lot of times when I work with clients, I have to teach them their own chart to remedy the issue. Okay, here's one for you. Bipolar charts. Okay. Liz is going to be like the best therapist ever after this. Okay. Because therapists drives me nuts when they're like, well, they have manias and they have hypomanias and they get depressed. And I'm like, okay, in what fashion and what is the timing? And of course they can't see that stuff. But as the astrologer, I'm like, I can tell when they're going to be depressed. I can tell when they're going to be in a mania. I can tell how long it's going to be. I can tell when it's going to end. And I can also tell what their life path and purpose is for that mania. No, I mean, I'm being arrogant again, but it's like I've helped so many bipolar people learn to watch their own transits. Once they can watch their own transits, they're no longer plagued with bipolar. They are now in charge of a miraculously powerful chart. I mean, I never let a client waste a mania. I'm like, oh, you're in a mania right now. You think you can do anything. Oh, let's see what your chart is trying to do. Oh, it's trying to do some stunts. You're a stunt man. Oh, okay. Like you're a stunt man who's in a stunt mania. Okay, it's time to do some stunts. You know what I mean? But like that would be like a Mars Uranus conjunction in Sagittarius, or you know, basically manias are when these, think about mania aspects in the chart. They're usually like think about a Mars Jupiter Moon conjunction in Gemini. Mars, Jupiter, Moon. What kind of mania might we see with that one? Gemini. What does Gemini do? Denise.
Lots of things, lots of projects, multitasking, things with the hands, things with the mind,
Good.
playing.
Yeah, they can write a whole manuscript of a book on a transit to that. This might be a writer who writes book after book after book after book. And we don't want to be like, well, you're just in a mania. Calm down. It's like Danielle Steele you're talking to. No, I don't know. It's like Stephen King you're talking to. Can you imagine if someone told him to calm down? We wouldn't have the 30,000 books he wrote, But I'm really not joking at all. I mean, really what we want to do is get people attuned to what is the life path and purpose of these manias you go into. What are they trying to do? What is your artistic process? How long do they last? And what are 20 good things you can do with a mania? Because then counselors get mad at me and they say, well, manias blow up marriages. And I'm like, not if they're used in a way that's for the greatest good of all concerned. Maybe that Moon, Mars, Jupiter would blow up a marriage from over talking. Like this is a mania where the person's walking around the hospital talking and talking and talking. They can't stop talking. They're just, and their throat chakra is just like, right? And you're like, give them a podcast. And now they're talking and wait a second, a podcast, you're supposed to talk, right? Or writing a book, you're supposed to write a book, right? So we don't want them to blow up marriages. We want the person to live out their highest path and purpose with these energies. But the point is if we have a chart that's bipolar, we want to get the different poles on different wheels and help them. Bipolar is actually misleading because there's rarely two poles. There's usually 4 aspect clusters. So, you could say like prolific writer, that would be the Moon, Mars, Jupiter. And then maybe we see that they have a Sun, Saturn conjunction in Capricorn. And we're like, what? That's so different. This is where we get depression or Now they're all serious and boundaried. What? It almost looks like multiple personalities, doesn't it? Where, this Gemini part is just one personality, and then the Sun Saturn is super quiet, super reserved, super inward. And maybe that's the business person in this person. We're like, oh, that Sun Saturn in you runs the business. You're a writer who runs a publishing company, or you're a writer who self-publishes, and that Sun Saturn builds the business. I see. And when they have transits of their Sun Saturn, they're not going to feel like writing at all. They're going to feel like, doing this business work. So I think, having these aspect clusters on different wheels can help us to identify the different aspects of personality and, just help the client understand what those are. Any comments or questions there? I know I make a lot of claims. I'm crazy about astrology. That's like me. Like, I just love astrology because it's like I have bipolar. I have to sit and listen to my psychiatrist tell me about it. I'm like, you don't know the first thing about bipolar, bro. Like, I'm like, I could run circles around you. I actually can time every mania. Like, you see all the crochet animals my Mars and Cancers made this month, like, I mean, I don't know. I can't believe that astrologers are expected to act like we don't know anything when we actually know more about certain things than other people. So that's what I'm here to say. Okay. What is the proving phase, and when do we use this in astrological remediation? I got this from a counselor I worked with. She said that she would have to do provings about things, and I got to thinking, and I thought, we actually need to do this. Like, let's say we're working with a bipolar person. We might need to prove to them that the transits are bringing their manias, because people don't believe us generally at first. They're like, how could the celestial objects cause this, even though the moon rules the tides and does all these things to our moods? But I think we do have to prove to people that the chart's at work somehow. And this is actually quite complex. Maybe with the moon, Mars, Jupiter, and Gemini, we time a few transits to it and we say, can you watch these time periods? Did you feel like writing? Were you in a mania? And then a few months go by and they're like, I was absolutely in a mania all those times. You're like, okay, we've kind of proved that it's in the chart. Now we can really start working together, right? Or maybe we prove to them that the one part is a mania and the other part's kind of a depression, and we somehow prove that. I get really creative in proving astrology to people. I'm kind of beyond it. Like, I'm the point where everyone knows I'm an astrologer, so that they don't really hang around me if they don't really believe in it. But I will do things like, text someone right on time, and be like, are you in a mania right now? And I'm doing it right when the transits are, and that would have to be like Mars is in the pocket and then the moon triggers it or something. And I'm like, oh, we're in the pocket of that mania right now. Like, all right, I'm like, now, how about now? And they're like, how did you know? It's like, well, I'm a remote viewer with the government, actually. No, I'm just kidding. But I do think astrology is like remote viewing for emotions. But the point is like, if you time things correctly, you can really prove that astrology works. Now, is the proving phase necessary? I mean, no, we can just give them the theory and then let them go on their way. I think this really became important to me. I had a big metal dude I was dealing with who had a kind of violent chart, and he was gonna go to jail for domestic violence, and we couldn't get him to calm down. And it got to this life or death phase where I'm like, we need to prove that this is celestial so that you know that you need to learn your own chart. Like, I'm like, adult men learn their own charts. Like, grow up, pull up your pants and go for it. You got to learn your own transits, But, I needed to prove that these transits were working so that he could believe that it was celestial, and that we could maybe do some things like cupping him or bloodletting, pulling out some iron, doing something so that he would be less violent and less aggressive. Because if we're dealing with like a criminal case where the person might go to jail for 20 years, like, we really want to pull out all the stops in that case. And so I think and that was an example of when I really was like, okay, we got to prove this, So I think we don't need this in every case, but I do think it is useful. Okay. All right. So now here's some philosophies for walking through challenging transits, or challenging times. You know, when we, let's say once we identify a chart that has things in it, like we see a violent thing, or we see a grandiose narcissistic thing or something, then what do we do with transits to this thing? Robert Hand and many other people, I love planets in transit. Mine is very well used, but you guys probably have planets in transit. Robert Hand, often takes a temperance approach. Like he'll say, don't be so grandiose. Check your ego and make sure you're not being too much. Or if it's a violent aspect, he'll say like, check your violence right now. Try to not be violent. You know, Temperance is the big thing with planets in transit. And that is actually great advice. I mean, we're not going to doubt that that's great advice. Um, it's just hard energetically for people to really temper themselves when they're in transits. That's why manias are so destructive, is the person knows they're in a mania and they can't stop doing the mania. Well, that's why temperance doesn't really work. You don't tell someone in a mania, like, stop being in a mania. You know what I mean? Like, you have to run the energy somehow. So I think if temperance works for you, that's great. Another thing is to fade it out, honestly. Do we have to remedy every transit? No. I fade transits out all the time. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to be crabby next Thursday. That's it. I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to be crabby. Like, I don't know. I don't always want to remedy everything. You know what I mean? But I'm not going to be crabby. I just know that I'll be crabby. That's fine. I think, but if you had a moon, Jupiter, Pluto, or sorry, moon, Jupiter, Venus, and Taurus, and you knew that you had transits to it that made you want to eat a lot or binge eat, you might just say, I'm just going to eat a lot and grow and be big. I'm just going to be big. That's okay. It's okay to fade out your chart. We don't have to be crazy. A remediation aspect to this would be, with this binging aspect of the personalities, we try to break into the frequencies and offer a remedy. Maybe we put a bunch of black stones around the Taurus element to try to block the energy flow and make the senses dulled down. Maybe we wear a black obsidian necklace or something like that, or we try to give it 20 outlets that aren't eating, like flower arranging, making perfume, anything that engages the ear, nose, and throat. This that's called symbolic substitution, where we give it other things to do, essentially. So maybe we have them make a list of 20 things to do other than binge eat. But this is different than normal doctors who are just saying, like, don't binge. We're saying we can see the manias in which you binge. We can see why that is. We can see that you're wired with taste buds that are stronger than the next person. We want to offer 20 activities that are not binge eating when these energies come in, so that you can actually use your mania a different way or whatever. But the point is that we're trying to cut in with remedies when the timing is right. Another example of this would be with that Mars Saturn conjunction in Gemini. Remember that one where her jaw was all tight? Well, we can just fade out transits to that and be like, you're going to have a migraine. Like, okay, but maybe we schedule a massage therapy appointment every time Mars hits this thing for the next 6 months. That's actually not that hard. You go into your ephemeris, you look at Mars triggering it, and you're like, massage in this week, massage in this week, massage in this week, massage in this week. See that would be a remedy that you guys could already do for somebody. And it's just being a theoretician. We're theoreticians mainly. We don't really usually go in and do the manipulations. We just tell the acupuncturist, can you do X, Y, and Z, or, this or that. But yeah, so remediation is just one approach. The other one here is mega manifestation. And this actually speaks to your question, Denise. Do you see that? Temperance is like the Robert Hands approach, or balance, going to the opposite. And mega manifestation would be to just go full on, like if you have the binging transit, go ahead and eat, but also do flower arranging, make some perfume, bake some cookies, and do like 20 things the moon, Venus, Jupiter, and Taurus would do. Like, just be mega, You know, you're a baker, you're a crafter, you're making YouTube videos where you make pottery, like you just do all kinds of things. Like instead of binging on food or just one use of the transit, we give it like 20 uses, right? Um, with that Moon, Mars, Jupiter, and Gemini, if they're talking and talking and talking and talking, which I feel like I'm doing right now, the Mars and Jupiter are conjunct in Gemini. I'm talking so much during this lecture. But anyways, like if they're talking and talking and talking and talking, have them write a manuscript and write in their journal and text people and email and make a marketing plan for their business and. See what I mean? So a lot of times the mega manifestation approach actually gets the most done in life, and it channels all the chi through them, and they don't really get sick, and they grew a lot. You know, if it's a violent aspect and we have a transit to it, have them be in a ultimate fighting tournament, right? So you give them, or run a marathon or something like that. But any questions about this or comments?
I think in some ways I have been doing some of these because, you know, for example, talking with clients about like the Saturn and Pisces transit, like we kind of came up with like almost like ways to channel the energy. I remember one specific client loved music and loved concerts and hadn't gone to any for several years. And so it was like, okay, you're going to get disciplined about it, right? You're going to make plans around it. You're going to commit to it. You're going to go to a concert, you know, every 2 months. And you're going to schedule it, right? And you're going to save your money for it. And, you know, so.
Beautiful. Man, you're good at this. And if you look at the Saturn page in this book, that's actually one of the remedies for Saturn is scheduling things. It says practicing discipline, scheduling things, self-imposed rules, deadlines, persistent effort. So you're actually right on track with that's what Saturn remedies, some of them are, you know.
But that would almost be like a mega manifestation in some ways, right? It's like really just sort of like leaning into it.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah, leaning in, yeah, like going at it as opposed to saying it's happening to me. It's like we're Saturning now, you know, it's like beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, and I think this slide really helps me when I'm thinking about what to do about what we see. It's like does it need balancing, like you're saying, or does it need to be just expressed? And I think each case is a little different. So, all right. So, okay, we have like 17 minutes. Okay, this is actually perfect. So here's some methodologies that you can start trying right away. Strategic planning is a huge one. You guys know what this is. Electional astrology is strategic planning. It's, you know, planning a good day for your wedding, planning a good day to start your business. And that is using the clock, the 10-handed clock, essentially to time things correctly. You know, when is a good time for X? Well, I would have you extrapolate this to a much more micro and often level where you're constantly planning. Like planning massages on certain transits is strategic planning, right? It's just planning to the chart. You know, if you're building a business, you can plan to use the aspects of your personality for what they like to do, you know, as the moon hits them through the month. If we had a kind of violent toddler, we might say, I don't want to go on a road trip with them when they're having a transit to their violent aspect of personality. And that's just bad planning, right? So I think being really strategic about planning around our hard aspects of personality is a big remedy. You know, Denise, with your T-square, it's like, I would plan to connect with people at the 5th degree, you know, and do kind of, you know, connecty things there. And then I would plan to go off on my own and think about it at the 23rd degree. You know, that is planning actually. You know, maybe over time you won't need to plan so specifically to that, but that you could if you wanted to. You know, Liz, you could plan things to your T-square. Once you kind of figure out what it likes to do, you could start planning things to it, you know, depending on the transit. So I think planning is just really good. You know, I recently had this couple who kept fighting and they both had Mars at the 13th degree. And it's like, whose fault is it? Well, it's both of you equally. You're both mad at the 13th degree. Like, you have like PMS at 13, which is like passionate Mars syndrome. But like basically, like I'm like, I don't know, plan your trip around it. Like if Mars is between 8 and 13, like don't go on your trip when you're Marsing. Like, can you I was like, you always get along at the 28th degree. Like you can't not get along at 28. Well, that's our pattern. We always fight and then the next day we're fine. We're like, okay, we're gonna plan for your trips and your romantic vacations for when you're getting along. Like, and then when you're fighting, you guys can have more space and go off and, you're not stuck in a car or whatever. But I think planning is a big one. So that's number one. Symbolic substitution is a huge one. There's a really good chapter on that in the book. And what it is trying to find those activities and outlets that really honor the planet and what it's trying to grow. Remember with the martial kid who's hitting kids in school, and we take him out of school and we put him in a martial arts gym. That is symbolic substitution. It's like martial arts. Like think about the word Mars is in there, martial. So it's like we actually want to substitute what they're doing with activities that honor that planet's need. Like Saturnian activity. Like I think when Denise was talking about scheduling going to concerts on Saturn, that's kind of a symbolic substitution where you're saying like Saturn wants structure, so we're going to give it some structure by scheduling instead of feeling cut off from things. We're going to schedule them, or like creating boundaries would be good. Like if someone had Saturn going over Venus by transit, maybe we would have them read the book Boundaries in Dating, right? Instead of being like, you're going to be cut off from love. Love will be hard. We're like, can you contrive some boundaries while dating as Saturn? Because Saturn likes boundaries, right? So it's like we kind of give the planet what it wants in the highest manifestation of what that planet would want. If Saturn goes over your moon and you're depressed, we'd say, okay, we need to give Saturn a bunch of hard work to do. Hard work is a better substitution for the symbol of Saturn than depression. Maybe. We have to look at the case, but see what I mean is, that's where in the case of the binge eating, if it's a Venus, Jupiter, moon, we might substitute Venusian activities like flower arranging and smelling things. That's why those are substitute activities, because they are Venusian. They make you think life is sweet and beautiful, but they're not food, right? So that is a symbolic substitution. Any questions about symbolic substitution? Okay. Gem remedies are super fun. In India, this is a classic one they use constantly. And if you guys look at the palmistry chart, like look up palm and planets, and you'll see there's planets all over the palm. So there's like, I think the Jupiter finger is this one. And I'm a theoretician, so I always just Google it. But it's like, let's say you had a Jupiter problem, like Jupiter was in Capricorn in the 12th house or something, and you're like, I have a weak Jupiter. Well, we might want to put a orange Jupiter stone on your Jupiter finger in a tin, like tin is the metal of Jupiter. So maybe a tin ring with an orange stone on your Jupiter finger. And that would be enhancing the Jupiter energy and reminding you to be more Jupiterian and. But that would be a gem where you kind of enhance the energy. Maybe in the case of the bulimic moon, Jupiter, Venus in Taurus chart, that's a real case I had actually. We might try to block that energy by putting a dark or black stone around the neck, because that's where Taurus lives, is around the neck. Or you could put a stone on the Venus finger, or the Jupiter finger. You could wear a black ring on the Jupiter finger. And what that's doing is reminding the soul to not be so Venusian. Like, not everything's about eating sugar. Like, you can't just eat all the sugar you want, maybe. But I also think gems aurically change something. Like that's the idea with them, is they actually change the aura. You know, Judith Hill, my mentor, would say if you put one drop of black ink in a glass of water, it changes the whole glass of water. Right? So one stone in the aura can change everything. You know, so gems are a big one. I actually work even beyond gems. Like I recently had a Saturn and Leo case where the person was not wanting to express themselves, and I prescribed a gold lion bling necklace because gold is the color of Leo. It would be on the heart where the Leo is suppressed, and it's a lion, so it reminds you to be more Leo, and it's kind of bling. You know what I mean? So you see how that's kind of like a almost like a gem remedy, but it's a jewelry remedy, you know, kind of thing. But gems and jewels and things are a fun one. You know, just like me wearing these star earrings gets the star party going on. Like, don't you feel like it's kind of an astrology party here? Because I got the stars on, right? I mean, jewelry and gems, they're a good reminder of how the person wants to be and what they want to happen. But also, I think they do change the aura in some fashion. Any comments or questions about gems? All right. Astral merging. I believe people are one of the biggest remedies you can ever use or have or utilize. I guess we shouldn't use people, utilize them. But the thing is, if you have a hard aspect of your personality, figure out who does well with you. Um, you know, I have someone I know with a Sun Mars conjunction in Leo. And he's a real beast to deal with. He's feels like he's got to be obeyed. He's super bossy. He's got oppositional defiance disorder. He's always like, I'm right and this and that. And, you know, some charts cannot handle him. You know, if someone has Mars opposed this Sun Mars, do you think they get along? They just don't get along. He just doesn't get along with everyone, right? But if someone has Jupiter and Leo at the same degree, you know, when he's being all bossy and narcissistic, they're like, yeah, well, I'm awesome too, and yeah, I think I'm great, and you know that might work, you know. But you really want to find charts that have good synastry with the hard aspects of personality. And moreover, we want to know how people how they trigger that aspect of personality. You know, if we go back to that violent kid with the Moon Mars conjunction in Aries, if there's another kid with a Mars in Aries, they might trigger each other and they might get in a fist fight on the playground because they're both annoyed at the same time. Well, they might be great fighting partners in the gym, right? But like they're not going to get along on the school playground. We recently had somebody in the remediation class say that she met someone who works in a prison, and she said she's teaching the guys their charts, and a lot of them have Mars and Aries. Well, they all pop off at the same time. Like the moon goes through Aries and they're all just getting in fights with each other. You know, it's like, so we want to look at who vibes with you on which day and how. You know, if we had a depressive aspect to the personality, like a Moon Saturn conjunction in Cancer or something, well, maybe we want to find somebody with Jupiter and Pisces trying it. You know, that person would be like, well, have you ever tried manifestation theory? And do you want this crystal? And I made you this crystal grid, and I could read all these good tarot cards for you, and like they're like the super spiritual remedy because they're all Jupiter and Pisces. But maybe you have, I'm sure you guys are coming up with several charts that could do well with that Moon Saturn. Like I can see you guys wheels turning, right? You're like, well, this one could be good. So I think it's more good to say like, who is in this? We do this a lot with kids. When we have a kid with a hard aspect of personality, we look at the parents and who does what with that aspect of personality. Often one parent will be fine with it and the other person cannot deal with it, right? We're like, okay, this parent's a remedy to that aspect and you exacerbate that aspect. So we're going to do some strategic planning around that. Does that make sense? The other thing is like composite charts. If you have, you know, a person with a Mercury Saturn conjunction and they cannot talk, well, maybe we see a composite chart with a Mercury Jupiter conjunction. And for some reason, this relationship pulls out the person from their, you know, not talking kind of thing. So I think the lesson there is humans are a good remedy. You just got to kind of choreograph things. You know, if someone has a hard Mars, look for a marriage partner who doesn't trigger their hard Mars, you know, stuff like that. Okay. And the last one, and thanks for listening to me so much. I don't love lecturing because I'm always like, I feel it's just rude to just talk at someone. But it is a good way to get out a lot of info. Okay. So the last thing is astrally timed information. This is like that one where I said I text the person right on time and be like, are you in a mania right now? You know, I think timing stuff to the charts of our friends or our clients is so magical because we can hit them right when they're in a mood, you know. And music shares are really good for this one. You know, if someone's in a martial mood, maybe we send some aggravated metal music to them and we're like, how's this hit you right now? And they like, oh, that's exactly how I feel, you know. Or maybe we try to soothe them with some Chopin or something. But I think the point is that dealing with things right when they're getting triggered is one of the hearts of remediation, is dealing with people when they're in the mood. And eventually you train them to deal with themselves when they're in the mood, in this mood, right? It's we're kind of catching them in the mood to teach them what it's like. We're like, this, you're acting like that right now. See, it's right now. And then they're like, oh, okay. And then we're like, now next time you can catch yourself in that mood, you know? So I think timing things is a really good, effective way to work with remedy. All right. Well, that's what I got.
Thank you so much. It was a very large volume of information, and I can see why you have like an entire study group.
Yeah, totally. It takes years. Well, we do have a YouTube channel. If you guys want to learn more, you can just look up my name and then Astrological Remediation. And I'm basically going to try to be getting the whole book out in YouTube videos because I really want everyone to be able to do this. It's not like one astrologer should be a remedy artist, like we all should and or could, you know. So
Thank
you
you.
guys are welcome to come to the Moyer Press School anytime. Just email me or find me.
Thank you, Andrea. Anyone have comments or questions before we shut things down for the evening?
I just wanted to finally take off my mute on purpose and say thank you. I was running around, but I didn't want to miss this. So appreciate your time, Andrea.
Sure, nice to meet you, Vera.
Thank you so much. This was super helpful and informative, and I'm really inspired now. So, yeah, I'll
Yes.
definitely have lots to look into.
You're going to be a great therapist and astrologer. I mean, you already are probably, but
And you got the name.
that's true.
Thank
If
you
you
all for
guys do
joining.
want to, yeah, if you do want to find the school, it's just my website is andreagehrz.com, and then there's an events tab, and we have all the school events under there. So that's how you find us.
Thank you. Well, everyone have a lovely night. I appreciate it. And I will post the video on YouTube. So if you want to watch it again, when you can actually sit down and have your notebooks handy, it will be there.
All right. Thank you, Denise. I so appreciate it.
Thanks. Good night.
All right.